search committee, reporting to their dean, said, in this search, we weighed the diversity statement, the teaching statement, and the research statement equally. University professors do two things. They teach and they research. So the search committee was saying, for this astrophysicist we just hired, their statement on DEI was just as important to us and weighed into our final decision just as much as their teaching and research statement. That alone is truly remarkable. And that was not an isolated incident.
Welcome to another episode of Counterculture, the show that stands at the intersection of reason and faith in the battle against sentimentality. Since Hamas's murder of more than 1,200 Israelis on October 7th, the combination of out and proud anti-Semitism on college campuses, along with the tepid, middling statements from university administrators that drew the ire of high-profile donors, culminated with the recent testimony of the presidents of Harvard, Penn, and MIT before a House committee. Many were stunned the presidents of these status schools could not bring themselves to offer moral clarity in response to the advocacy on college campuses for the genocide of Jews, their campuses, in fact. It was a revolting, pathetic display, but the statements of these pseudo-intellectual, dye-addled identitarian bean counters was not a surprise to those who've been watching America's universities transformed into totalitarian re-education camps over the past several generations. Do we now have a moment where, thanks to the gruesome hate on parade, the cowardice of administrators, and the Supreme Court's decision in the Harvard admissions case, we can rescue the academy from its small-minded anti-West captors? If such a moment is upon us, will it require individual and small groups of professors to lead the rescue mission? To help us see and seize whatever opportunities may be present, we're pleased to be joined by John Saylor, an academic with the National Association of Scholars, who, along with his colleagues, has been toiling in relative obscurity as the head of its Keeping the Republic project. Perhaps that's about to change. John Saylor, welcome to Counterculture. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, so let's start with the reverberations from that testimony before the House committee from Liz Magill, Claudine Gay, and company, particularly since Liz Magill was terminated subsequent to her testimony, where she couldn't bring herself to say that advocacy for the genocide of Jews on campus is inconsistent with the code of conduct. How big a moment was Liz Magill being dumped by the Board of Trustees at Penn after seemingly getting a vote of confidence just before that?
Yeah, I think this moment in higher education is the culmination of probably the last 3 years, at the very least. What we've seen is, over the last 3 years, universities jettisoning the idea of institutional neutrality, the idea that the institutions themselves should stay neutral on controversial ideological political issues. We've seen them instead embrace the idea that social justice is the most important thing they could possibly pursue. It's more important than the pursuit of truth, which is the historic and correct way to understand the purpose of the university. And so what we saw in that testimony was a striking case of hypocrisy. On one hand, if you had asked about any other group, I don't think you would have had that answer. I don't think you would have had that answer if if Elise Stefanik asked Claudine Gay or Liz Magill about people advocating for the genocide of any other group. And that's notable because that's the way that universities have been operating. They have jettisoned the idea of free speech and academic freedom. And then what we saw in that recent testimony was that in this instance, they fall back on sort of a procedural understanding of free expression to defend what they've done. And I think it was eye-opening for a lot of people. And it seems like it's changed things. It's changed the way that people perceive higher education now.
Well, the one other group they probably could have gotten away with giving that answer to is if it was straight white Christian males as the target for genocide of sorts. They're not though we don't belong to the same tribe per se. But yeah, it's definitely the oppressor and oppressed binary here. And so that's why I just wonder how much of a moment the removal of Liz Magill really is. I mean, she stays on as a law professor because of tenure. There's no reason to believe that Penn will not select somebody just as bad, if not worse than her. Remember, Liz Magill came in, this is sort of underreported because who pays attention to university presidents unless it's your alma mater, your kids go there. But she came in as somebody who was a great advocate of free expression. And as was pointed out in that House committee hearing, I mean, the Ivy League, particularly Harvard, but the Ivy League is ranked as the least open to free expression on campus by FIRE and other organizations that sort of track how much universities really are living up to their advanced billing as open marketplaces of ideas and the free exchange of views. I mean, that's just not the case on those campuses. So this is why I suppose you had to have those sort of antiseptic procedural responses that you referenced. And so to me, just taking out one of those individuals, one of the university presidents, against the backdrop of donors threatening to remove $100 million if she wasn't removed, I just wonder if that is just sort of a casualty of the DIE war, or if that really represents the beginning of a change.
I think it's yet to be seen. And I think this is an important moment for people who are able to articulate a vision for higher education and able to carry out that vision, because there are a lot of ways that this could make no difference, and there are a lot of ways that the response right now could actually make things worse. So one way that this response, this moment where everyone has suddenly realized that there is a problem with higher education, could make this worse, is if the end result is to decide to add one more category to our list of protected groups, or of groups that deserve special privileges, special protections, special carve-outs in the name of social justice, and then we simply apply the same paradigm to them. I think that what's needed is a wholesale reconsideration of what people think higher education is for. And I'm not convinced that that's going to happen at all. What we will see is a lot of university presidents fearful that they might be next, or fearful that donors can push them in all sorts of directions. But that alone doesn't mean that we're going to get change in the right direction. What we need is a concerted effort to articulate the true mission and a true positive vision for higher education, which starts with going back to the pursuit of truth. And to the extent that that gets put into the minds of university leadership, then it could be seen. It could be a very good thing, but it at the very least is only a first step. And without a proper articulation of how to move forward, I don't know if we're gonna get there. And you're absolutely right. This is one university president. We have entire university bureaucracies that exist to basically enforce a particular way of viewing the world, and that has to change. If we don't address that basic issue, then this is going to be merely a symbolic gesture.
Yeah, I want to get to the reimagining, revisioning higher ed, as well as how deep this DIE culture goes in a second. But in terms of the immediate response to assess whether the Liz Magill will be some sort of watershed moment, her termination, it is worth noting that the response from Liz Magill and from these other universities, to your point, was what? We're going to set up a center for the study of anti-Semitism. Oh yeah, and Islamophobia and racism in general. So it was that identitarian response. I want to read you something that Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute wrote in a recent op-ed in the Journal, and see if you agree with this. She writes, does McDonald, gerrymandering Jews into a oppressed class for DEI purposes won't do anything to prevent the propaganda in these classrooms, which college leaders are at pains not to address. Since October 7th, presidents and faculty have routinely spoken of the interconnectedness of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. A November 16th lecture at Cornell University by Ross Brand, for example, professor of Judeo-Islamic Studies, was entitled The Intersectionality of Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Racism. And she makes the point that the fundamental problem here is that you have an anti-Western civilization ethos on campus. And all of these identitarian policies and these die warriors are just a manifestation of that ethos.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. The university administrators generally make this clear. You add one more group to our list of oppressed groups, you still have a whole apparatus devoted to policing speech that ostensibly harms oppressed groups, still devoted to a view of the world that myopically focuses just on this idea that everything is about power, everything is about oppression, every problem stems from the existence of privileged groups and the oppression that they dole out, and that I think is, first of all, antithetical to any good education, because it's a very vapid view of the world, but it's also not an especially good way to address the problem of anti-Semitism on campus, because anti-Semitism, the issue of anti-Semitism in the entire post 10/7 attack, this entire conflict, it just does not fit into the social justice paradigm. You cannot understand it by applying a social justice lens to what's going on, and that's one reason why a lot of Americans simply don't know how to respond to this attack and then this war, because they only have the language of social justice to fall back on. They're trying to find an easy way to understand it through the lens of, well, one group is oppressed, one group is the oppressor, and that's just an irrelevant and silly way to look at what has happened. So I absolutely think that Heather McDonald's right, and that's a great danger that we're looking at. And I'm glad that Penn seems to have been repudiated for this. Nobody's cheering on Penn's response, and that's correct.
Right, but the Students for Palestine organizations on college campuses continue unabated. Although, to your point, I mean, there are illustrations of exactly what you're talking about. The grotesque Queers for Palestine, sort of like, this is, to your point about, this is the only thing everything has to be force-fed through this this construct, because this is the only way that we can make sense of the world. And so it leads you to beclown yourself, as so many of these young and not so young people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because what I report on is often how these ideas become mandatory at key junctures in academia. For instance, faculty hiring. So increasingly, in order to get a job in academia, you have to submit a diversity statement. Sometimes that factors in very, very heavily in the evaluation process. Now, according to my reporting, a lot of universities will effectively disqualify faculty job candidates if they say, I support a race-neutral form of pedagogy. To put it simply, if you say you support a colorblind equality, your job will be imperiled. Like that's not an exaggeration. That's according to the rubrics that a lot of universities use. At the same time,
I don't want to interrupt. But I mean, but I want to get beyond the status schools. I mean, not to denigrate anyone, but the state schools too. This is not just something that's happening at Ivy League, and I think there's a lot of alumni who are focused on Ohio State's football program and not so much focused on Ohio State's hiring practices. And you had this expose where you were able to get all sorts of documents from Ohio State about just exactly how they've been doing faculty hiring. And there are some incredible examples of the thought process that went into hiring the astrophysicist or hiring the freshwater biologist, and I wanted you to detail those to make sure people understand it's happening at state schools, it's happening just about everywhere, every college that's not like a small Christian college or named Hillsdale.
Absolutely. So I will 100% agree with you. I uncovered a huge trove of hiring documents from Ohio State. This is basically an unprecedented number of documents that I was able to acquire through a public records request detailing how diversity, equity, and inclusion factored into these hiring decisions throughout the College of Arts and Sciences. So just a massive number of university professors being hired at Ohio State. And I don't really have good reason to think that this hasn't been replicated elsewhere. In fact, I have great reason to think it has been replicated elsewhere because I've reported on other universities that are not Ivy League schools. We're talking about UNC Chapel Hill, Texas Tech University, UC Berkeley, and so on. They many of these schools implement the same practices. What did I find? You brought up the astrophysicist. So there was a search in astrophysics. The search committee, reporting to their dean, said, in this search, we weighed the diversity statement, the teaching statement, and the research statement equally. University professors do two things. They teach and they research. So the search committee was saying, for this astrophysicist we just hired, their statement on DEI was just as important to us and weighed into our final decision just as much as their teaching and research statement. That alone is truly remarkable. And that was not an isolated incident. Over and over again, these search committees valued DEI, as much as they valued any other factor in hiring faculty. And this is not an isolated incident. This is increasingly the way universities, public and private, are carrying out hiring.
How does the Harvard admissions case impact that? Because I know there's going to have to be some workarounds we talk about with respect to student admissions, but the process for hiring faculty as well. I know what the University of Wisconsin college system just cut a deal with the legislature there, where basically in exchange for a bunch of state taxpayer money to fund their engineering programs and so on and so forth, they're reducing their DEI staff. Now, I don't know if that represents a culture change, but it represents horse trading that wasn't going on before the Harvard decision.
Well, I will say, remarkably, since that decision was announced, the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents voted it down, saying that we would rather leave the money on the table and keep our full-fledged DEI offices than take the nearly $1 billion of funding. So the horse trading went back and forth, but that shows that these university administrators and university appointees are very much devoted to maintaining this bureaucracy. Regarding the Harvard decision, what's notable is that the Harvard decision doesn't really have anything to do with faculty hiring now, or hiring in general.
Not yet.
That's true. So a lot of people think that what's going to happen is that the precedent set in the Harvard decision is going to affect university hiring and going to affect hiring more generally. But it's worth noting that the law regarding hiring was much more straightforward in the first place. If you were not hired because of your skin color, whether you're black or white, you could file a lawsuit, and if it's provable that was the reason you were not hired, then you will get a payout. You will get a big payout. the Civil Rights Act is pretty clear that you cannot discriminate in hiring, which means that the ability to just say we're going to hire somebody and this person has to be of a particular race, except for very narrowly defined affirmative action plans that are not generally applicable. That that was illegal before the Harvard decision. And, there are two things to say about that. One is that universities have been pretty okay with simply breaking the law. And I've seen this again and again. Universities will do exactly what I said and hire people on the basis of race, even though they're really not allowed to. But the other thing that's worth noting, and this goes back to the reporting I did on Ohio State, is that one way around simply just hiring on the basis of race is saying we're not hiring on the basis of race, we're hiring on the basis of your ability to contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion regardless of your race. And they're pretty open about this. They say, well, this allows us ultimately to diversify our faculty because these faculty members who are very, very good at contributing to diversity, equity, and inclusion in their scholarship, in their teaching, they're more likely to be from a diverse background. And so even though we're not hiring on the basis of race, we're going to end up, boosting our numbers. And this is obviously a proxy for race, but in some ways a legal workaround. Now, the problem is that legal workaround is actually far worse than simply doing overt affirmative action, because what you get is not just hiring functionally on the basis of race, but also hiring on the basis of adherence to particular sets of views. And I mean, let's go back to that Ohio State example. One of the position was for a professor of freshwater biology. The search committee was very clear once again. They said we weighted research as 60% of job candidate score, and we weighted DEI as 33% of the candidate score. So I mean, that's a huge amount of weight for this DEI statement. If you have a statement that gets scored very badly, even if you're the best biologist out there, you will not get this job. And if you're a mediocre biologist, but you have an excellent DEI statement, it's possible that you could be, ranked above other people who are just objectively better at the job. So already that creates issues of academic excellence. We're talking, people like to talk about merit. That's an instance where you're downplaying excellence and people's abilities in their actual field for the sake of something that's totally unrelated to their field. But more than that, when you look at the way that these statements are actually evaluated, they're typically indistinguishable from an ideological litmus test. The rubric for evaluating the diversity statements used on that particular search, they included it in their report that I acquired, and that rubric says you get a high score if essentially you use the language of Ibram X. Kendi to describe your approach to anti-racism. I mean, it's very much just echoes his work, and that's an extremely ideological approach to the topic of racism, and it's built right into this rubric. And that raises issues not just over merit, academic excellence. It doesn't just raise issues about the use of race in hiring and kind of legal issues related to non-discrimination. It also raises First Amendment issues. This is basically saying you have to think a certain way in order to get hired, and that's a fundamental betrayal of what higher education is for.
Well, I mean, Ibram Kendi, his philosophy in a sentence is the way you cure past racism is with present racism. What could be more at odds with Title VI and Title IX of the Civil Rights Act or the spirit of the Harvard decision and just what we know about what a college campus, sort of theoretically once upon a time was supposed to be, and the sort of values that were supposed to be present in everything that they do, both on the teaching front and the hiring front. So there's no question. And so what they've done, it seems to me, is, and what I suspect a lot of colleges will do in the wake of the Harvard decision, is they use their subjective interpretation of a diversity statement in order to meet their objective goals of bean counting by intersectional score, right? I mean, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, so I don't want to downplay the significance of the Harvard decision. I mean that I think for anyone who thinks that race is not a good criterion for admissions, I think it's a straightforward victory. But I also think that we are fooling ourselves if we think that this is the end. This is basically just the beginning. And that's one key area that my reporting and writing, that I very explicitly try to focus on in my reporting and writing, because I have professors who have come up to me and said, every day the university wakes up and breaks the law. And early on, when people told me these kinds of things, and I was just starting out on this beat, I thought maybe they were exaggerating, but I can tell you it's pretty much true. Universities constantly try to skirt the law, but then again, if they're breaking the law, then people who want to push back have recourse. And I think over the next couple of years, what we are going to see is an increasing number of legal battles, but it requires a lot of investigation. It requires a lot of legal energy, and it probably is going to require lawmakers to continue to build on the success of the Harvard decision. And fortunately, I see all of those things happening, and I'm to some extent participating in that. But it's not going to be an easy battle.
Oh no, I mean I'm perhaps even more skeptical than you are, in part because going back to the Civil Rights Act and those provisions that were supposed to do things and did, like elevate women's sports at the collegiate level. I mean, Mark Perry, retired econ professor from University of Michigan, who's a friend, he's become like a one-man watchdog for civil rights violations on college campuses. He's filed some 900 Title VI and Title IX complaints. Many of them have been adjudicated in his favor and have required the Department of Education to direct colleges to stop doing something that they were doing that was violative. But I mean, it hasn't changed the culture on those campuses. It hasn't changed the culture in higher education generally. I mean, so hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of essentially litigation, and many of them successful, and yet it seems like that's just a bump in the road for a handful of colleges. It doesn't shift the paradigm in any material way.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is likely something that will have to be a multi-step process. One, we need to make it abundantly clear what's going on in colleges, universities. And as somebody who reports on this, has been eye-opening for me to see a number of people act like everything that's going on in higher education is news to them. We have people responding to letters that Claudine Gay wrote 3 years ago, where she was articulating a clearly ideological mission. She was articulating that the goal of the university is to pursue certain political ends. And it's funny to me to see people respond with shock, and I'm sure it's funny to you too. This is what university administrators will say every day. University presidents wrote letters like that all the time, and so great. I'm glad that more people are upset about that. But the fact that people are waking up to this means that we need all the more to press and show what's actually going on in the university campuses. Because again, even when I started out, I didn't know to what extent really the core mission of higher education had been distorted, and it really has. And there are more examples to bring up. But beyond that, that's just the first step. The next step would be to massively excise the kind of distortions that you can remove through the law. And I mean, there are very easy things to do that a lot of people, lawmakers still haven't done. So To give just one example, increasingly federal funding agencies require anyone who wants a grant to submit a plan for promoting equity along with their grant application. We have, for instance, the Department of Energy, which is the largest funder of the physical sciences in the United States, requiring this for every single grant applicant. We see similar programs through the NSF, which is a major culprit in the spread of these policies throughout higher education. That's the National Science Foundation. They've essentially created many of the DEI offices that exist on college campuses. Those offices were initially funded by the NSF, you have the NIH that's currently funding a massive grant program for DEI-focused hiring, and the practices that they're encouraging are very similar to the practices that I uncovered in my recent report on Ohio State. It's so there's a lot that happens that's under the purview of lawmakers, and lawmakers have to get really serious about saying that no, these things are not allowed, and that's very easy to do. That's not in violation of academic freedom. That supports academic freedom, and more organizations are coming around to acknowledging that this is the case. But then after that, after you take a much harder line approach to removing these policies that are truly disastrous, even just from a free speech standpoint, that promote particular ideological approaches to research and teaching, what you're still left with is a university system that doesn't have a proper vision. And what you can't do is leave it there. You have to find ways to build anew. And I see some university systems trying to do this. So in Ohio, they just created 5 new schools devoted to civic life and education within their public universities. I'm confident that the people that they're going to hire to as faculty within those institutions, those are going to be people who have a different vision for higher education, a vision for higher education that's focused on the common good and the pursuit of truth, who focus on academic freedom not as a sort of procedural value that is an end in itself, but rather a value that exists for the promotion of the truth and the pursuit of truth. That's the kind of initiative that I think needs to come now and needs to come after we excise the rod. But
why do you have confidence that Ohio will hire professors that have a commitment to pursuit of the truth when you were just detailing the way that they hire individuals at Ohio State?
Yeah, so these schools have been established by the state legislature. The people in charge of the state legislature essentially had to be involved with approving the advisors who will be the ones hiring the first the upper level administrators for these schools that will be independent, virtually independent of the leadership at OSU and other places. So this is a chance to start anew, and the legislators who crafted the bill that created these centers, I think, were very careful to create mission statements that would bind the leadership of these institutes to do the right thing. And now, personnel is everything in this instance. If they hire the wrong people, it's not going to go well. And so, but I have reason to think, based on what I've just described, that they're going to empower the right people. If you look at the advisors who have already been nominated, you have people like Robbie George from Princeton University, who's a very I would say like one of the best leaders in higher education right now. He's going to be involved in this. If you, I think this is a good point to dwell on for a second. I mean, a lot of these policies are ultimately live or die in their execution. If you have a great policy that has been handed down by a court or a legislature, but it has to be applied by an administrator who simply doesn't believe in it, then you're going to find administrators fighting to defy the law or apply it in a way that makes it moot. And at the same time, if you empower people who have the right vision for higher education, that's going to make more of a difference than any set of policies. And that's really what we have to do. We have to find a way to empower the right people to set back in the right direction.
Well, so then does it have to all be new construction? You know, what you're talking about in Ohio or the University of Austin that's being stood up by, classical liberal-oriented academics and others. Because, just going back to what you had mentioned, we didn't really get into, but the stratification on college campuses, including state schools, how deep the dye infrastructure is. Going back to our mutual friend Mark Perry at University of Michigan, he documented in 2018, so 5 years ago, the dye staff at University of Michigan was 90 people that collectively cost more than $11 million a year. So think of what University of Michigan, which is perceived as one of the best state schools in the country, think of what that is probably in 2023. To pull out that many administrators that are essentially working as a social justice army within the campus, how do you do that? How do you change a school that has that sort of, well, I would say cancer? Do you just leave these patients to die and build anew, or is there a path to reorient University of Michigan, to reorient the Ivy League, to reorient Stanford?
Yeah, so the path forward, it looks a lot hazier and a lot more dismal for private universities, and maybe the newfound the newfound energy of certain donors that has really come as something of a surprise over the last month. Maybe that can make a difference, but I'm not especially optimistic that it will. I think that private universities are probably going to be exactly like they are for a long, long time. They're probably going to be a mess for a long, long time. And that goes for a lot of the public universities that we're talking about as well. I'm not especially optimistic about the University of Michigan or any university in Illinois or any university in California, but I think that universities that face some political pressure to reform themselves in places like North Carolina, in places like Ohio and Texas and Florida, I think that there is the possibility. Now, I'm talking about the options that exist right now. If you have just very energetic policymakers, then these tools are at their disposal. But even for energetic policymakers who have the proper even political capital to do things, they face hurdles. So I'm not all that optimistic that we're going to see a ton of universities change, but I still think that there are things that can be done, and Ohio is a good example of a place where reform has taken place. And I think that people need to pay attention to that. Like, this is the only option. This is the only option. These places will continue to be terrible if you don't at least embrace some of these tools that I've outlined.
What about, I wouldn't say defunding them, but desubsidizing them, whether it comes to, and this has been floated, as you know, whether it comes to taxing their multi-billion-dollar endowments, or it comes to getting the federal government out of subsidizing college tuition altogether. I mean, I'm not saying that the environment in DC right now provides for that, but maybe someday it will. Would those be good paths to pursue to, provide a more severe reckoning for, higher education, which has sort of become, in my view, like Voltaire described the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman. Higher education is not education, and it's certainly not a higher form of it. So what exactly are we subsidizing? Why the exemption? Why the tax exemptions? Let's remove that, or at least start that discussion. Maybe that gets some attention as well.
There was a bill recently introduced by Senator Vance that ties federal funding for higher education to adherence to the Dobbs decision, and creates, a new inspector general who would investigate whether people are actually following the decision. I think that people have generally been pretty hesitant to use federal funding as a tool to enact and create serious change, and I think it's necessary. You're bringing up a couple of interconnected issues, things like student loans, things like federal funding for universities, and there are smart reforms to make in each of those areas. And I would say, just in general, we view the bachelor's degree as too important. I think we have, for the last 50 years, placed too much of an emphasis on the bachelor's degree in the first place. That's a bad deal, actually, for a lot of people who would probably be better off not pursuing a college education as career preparation, but would be better off pursuing some other kind of career preparation. And it would make sense to put a lot more money towards that rather than towards the 4-year degree, which ends up not being an especially productive time for a lot of people. But that said, if we want to be competitive internationally, we need to have truly cutting-edge, top-notch research. We need to be the ones on the forefront of scientific innovation. We need to have people who are well prepared for leadership, which is what a proper college education should do. So I'm not in favor. There are some people out there who say, let's just burn it all down, and I don't think that that's the right approach. We can't burn it down. We need to train up. We need to train young people, and college is always going to be an important way to train a certain number of young people. Maybe not as many of the people as are going to college right now, but certainly it's going to be an integral tool. Now, that said, using federal funding to reform college so that it's a much better way to train young people and a much better way to do research, I think that's totally in bounds, and I'm glad that people are thinking more along these lines.
But it's difficult to get inside and reform from within, even if you're the university president. I mean, Mitch Daniels, as good as he was at Purdue, had a lot of problems with faculty too, and Purdue is not perceived to be a particularly hard left school. But it's monolithic in terms of ideology, just like most of these colleges are, as you were describing earlier. And so you have gatekeepers that are left, that hire academics that are left, and you get these sort of crazy distributions where 95% of the humanities are Democrat Party donors compared to 5% of that are Republican donors, just as one measure of how ideologically stilted it is. So it's easy to marginalize, to squash, to even prevent entrance to those that are not fellow travelers ideologically, and that's not good for the quality of research, the quality of innovation that's coming from these universities, because oftentimes you're not getting the most qualified person because you're more interested in their diversity statement than you are in their particular competency in their chosen field. So I just the layers of gatekeeping, and then how they recycle, the kids that go to the School of Education and become union teachers at the K through 12 level. I mean, it just becomes this vicious cycle that it seems very difficult to break. And I don't know how else you break it other than through standing up competitors and replicating competitors that exist, the Hillsdales and the Franciscans and the Grove City colleges, and doing something to, go after the 800-pound gorillas out there.
Yes. I think it hasn't been very long, this awakening where lawmakers and public figures are willing to really heavily criticize what's going on in universities. There have always been people out there who have pushed back. National Association of Scholars is a great example. We've been around for 30 years saying essentially the same thing, but lawmakers as recently as 4 years ago were not nearly as critical as they are now. And I think that we have to recognize what kind of a project this is. This is to reform something like higher education truly is going to be a multi-decade personnel and capacity building project. It's going to require work from the federal government. It's going to require work from state governments. It's going to require people working in think tanks, people who develop new innovative programs within universities, and people who develop new innovative programs to compete with universities. That's both new universities themselves, and I'm very happy to see that some have seemed to spring up, as well as entirely new institutions that provide an alternative to higher education. And we need a lot more of pretty much all of that. That's not going to change overnight. We're not going to get a new crop of people who are capable of being good university deans and good university presidents overnight. That's going to require, basically creating a whole new pipeline, and that takes years and years and years. People need to wrap their heads around the fact that that's what it's going to take, and I don't think there's any alternative. It takes all of that, and that's the task before us.
The National Association of Scholars, I just wanted to get people who aren't familiar with it a little bit more familiar with the work you do, the sort of amount of the number of professors and academics that you have in your ranks, and sort of what you tell them to do when they're so vastly outnumbered on campus. Maybe it's to pick small battles. Maybe the American Lit professor says, we need to get Shakespeare back as part of our English curriculum. Just like little victories. We need to, bring the canons of Western civilization back into favor with respect to curriculum. So just some background on NAS and what your rank and file professors out there are doing and how you try to organize and direct them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the National Association of Scholars is a membership organization and think tank devoted to upholding the standards of a traditional liberal arts education. We have about 5,000 members throughout academia, and a key function of our organization is to provide support to members who are no doubt on their campuses minorities, because only a select few will choose to associate with an organization like ours in higher education. But at the same time, we also try to coordinate, have professors coordinate, and use our network of faculty to create change on campus. So one thing that looks like is giving faculty the ability and supporting faculty in the increasingly important role of the whistleblower. So I am regularly in contact with university professors who will point out some dramatically disastrous policy that a university has adopted. So if you've heard about something that's gone on a university campus that's crazy, likely the NAS has commented on it, or in many cases even been the one to break the news. Just this past year, we broke the news about the University of Washington, which just flagrantly violated its own non-discrimination policy. And what happened was we got a tip about this. We filed a public records request for emails regarding the university, the hire in question. And our public records request was immediately followed up, not with them handing over the records, but rather with them conducting their own internal investigation. They investigated that instance, and what we found was, or what the university itself found was, yes, the psychology department at the University of Washington flagrantly violated the university's own non-discrimination policies. And that situation is still ongoing, but I think that shows the kind of thing that we're able to do. We're able to, through the force of our name, through the force of the tools that we have at our disposal, help faculty members who say, hey, something is going wrong, help them not only expose what's going on for the public to see, but also expose what's going on so that universities feel the heat and reform things. So, that's not all that we do, but that's a big function, especially of my own job.
Yeah, an important role, and 5,000 strong is a good start. So John Saylor, he's Senior Fellow at the National Association of Scholars. John, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Counterculture. Really appreciate your time and insights.
Thanks so much for having me.
Please like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And please leave a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear your thoughts.